So hi everyone, welcome to the Top Floor CEO podcast. I'm delighted to welcome Alex Hamilton, the founder of Radiant Law. Now, law firm, some people think of really long contracts, complicated, takes long time to do, means that the deals will take a long time, and it means that you're actually going to lose out. You also think of maybe burnout, people, because they've got to do these contracts, they burn out. Alex has a way of doing law that basically is the opposite of all of those things. And today he's going to talk about his journey, how he started in law, what he's experiencing, what he thought was wrong, how he changed it, and how he did today. He's also got a really good book that summarizes all of it. So over to you, Alex. Talk about how you, let's maybe start with how you started your journey in law to lead you up to the point you've got now.
So I had a very traditional career initially, and I think I fell into law as a lack of imagination. I qualified as kind of one of the big law firms in London, ended up working in US firm, worked in New York for a year. And I was doing kind of big technology and outsourcing deals. So you'd kind of hire me if you wanted a new network or you're, doing a deal. I did 17 deals opposite IBM, I think. Basically, yeah, so big deals, long-term relationships in them. And I was kind of increasingly getting this nagging feeling that this wasn't quite right. And that we were very expensive, but I wasn't sure that the way lawyers kind of approach doing deals was adding as much value as we'd like to think. I thought the industry's very self-centered, frankly, and supplier-centered rather than customer-centered. It seemed to me the incentives were all completely broken, right? Like charging by the hour doesn't exactly encourage efficiency. Partnership model means the lawyers don't tend to kind of have one way of working. They're all just constantly making it up as they go along. With there's a very high focus on autonomy in law firms. So none of this felt that it was helpful for customers, and I was concerned that not only were we not adding enough value and doing the deals probably wrong, but also burning out, like you mentioned, the lawyers. So yeah, so that was kind of the starting point of the doubt, I guess, that was setting in. And in 2009, I ended up doing this kind of Jerry Maguire. I don't know how old your audience is, but kind of Jerry Maguire, mission statement, not a memo, 17 pages. The executive committee is a very junior partner, arguing that we should look at fixed pricing, we should look at how we can add more value, we should look at technology and process improvements, part of what we do. And the executive committee of Latham & Watkins, which is now the second largest law firm in the world, very polite, but didn't fire me for this, but it became pretty clear that this wasn't what they were going to do. And they made a lot of money by ignoring me, right? The firm's twice as large. Partners, I think, are making about twice as much since then. So unfortunately, I believed my own bullshit and set up Radiant Law in 2011, so 13 years ago, to try to do things differently. So Radiant is fixed price only, no timesheets, not a partnership. We work for big companies doing their day-to-day contracts. So we look for kind of scale and lots of contracts. And we like that because it's a chance for us to learn how to keep improving the contracting process. And I'm pretty sure we're the fastest on the planet. We turn a contract typically in half a day. So if you want a contract drafted or a markup, dealt with or whatever, well, half a day, you'll get it back. And we have teams in Trinidad, North America, South Africa doing EMEA, and then just opened in Malaysia to cover APAC. So we're kind of global 24/5 contracting. So that's kind of what we do.
Okay. So can you just tell us then, how do you get these very large contracts that another firm would produce to get your equivalent shorter one in less time, but it still covers the points it needs to cover and protects the client from legal exposure?
Yeah, so I think contracts should be short, clear, reasonable, and relevant, right? Because the starting point is contracts don't matter, relationships matter, right? Or at least contracts don't add value. It's a relationship that adds value. And if you think about it that way, about both sides meeting the other side's needs, and which is what value creation is about, then A, you want the contracting process to be as positive as possible and focus on how to really make it work. And B, you want the contract process to be short because there's no value being created until the relationship gets going, something's signed, right? So the contract's just there as an enabling mechanism to create enough trust to allow people to get going. So because of the incentives problem, and incentives include law firms charging by the hour, but also understandably, lawyers worried that they'll be pointed at later and told, why didn't you, if anything goes wrong, why didn't you cover this? Why didn't you do it, right? So they have no incentive to make things just fast deals. They have incentive to make everything as one-sided and risk-free as possible. So because of that, you end up with longer and longer terms and longer, more painful negotiations and deeply unreasonable drafts being set out that beget deeply unreasonable responses. And then all of the pain that everyone knows, which is expensive, slow, and undermines the very relationship it's meant to be creating through the negotiating process, right? So how do you turn that on its head? Well, I think the starting point is that I think contracts should, from the get-go when they're sent out, be reasonable. What do I mean by reasonable? I mean, if you're on the other side, you would pick it up and go, that's fine, I'll sign it. Right? Doesn't mean giving the farm away, it just means it reflects both sides' positions, right? I think contracts should be short, right? We often take 60-page terms down to 6 pages. And how do you do that? Well, a lot of that stuff's just accreted nonsense, right? What fundamentally matters in a contract is, do you know what you're buying or selling, and do you know what you're paying? And is it workable, right? That's why contracts go wrong. And yet we spend all the time with putting boilerplate over boilerplate and all these liability provisions, sucking the oxygen out of the room for not negotiating what really matters, which is how do we make this work, and is it actually going to help me? Is it going to meet my needs and your needs? So how do we do that? We're pretty ruthless. We kind of take I would say not a scalpel, more a chainsaw to client terms. And what's interesting is I argue, we would become safer as a result, because actually these incredibly large, complicated contracts, no one understands quite all the edge cases and so on. If you have to boil a page of guff down to one sentence, it's more generally applicable, more principle-led, and easier for everyone to understand, more likely to be followed. So we do that with clients to help them do it. And I think whatever size organization you have, if you can, in your standard contracts, to the extent that you can use them, can send out really short, clear, relevant, and reasonable contracts that basically the other side should just sign because it's so boringly fine, right? Then you will speed up your sales, and that's pretty helpful. So yeah, that's how we do it.
Sure. So have you got some examples that you're able to share? So you talked about the 60 to 6. So what kind of things are in the 60 that other firms do that you think are irrelevant? Is it they just go into more detail, or is there certain things they're covering that you think is completely not?
Yeah, so there's this fascinating study that keeps being repeated by an organization called World CC, World Commerce and Contracting. So they're a global organization of contract managers and people both sides of buying and selling. So every 2 years, they ask their members, what are the things that everyone spends all their time negotiating, and what goes wrong, right? So what goes wrong is people aren't clear on what they're buying, what they're selling, and so on. What gets negotiated is liability, termination, indemnities, all of this nonsense, right? So in other words, most of the 60 pages is focused on what happens when the contract goes wrong, rather than how do we make it workable, right? And that means that everyone's spending all that time negotiating all that stuff. Most of the stuff in there for that is not required, right? It is just people repeating themselves time and time again on another way of whacking the other side if something possibly goes wrong, whatever reason, whatever. So when we shorten the contract, it covers the same topics, but it's just basically just says, listen, the capital liability is X, not we're going to have this. That generally is kind of light on indemnities, heavy on putting front and foremost what the service is, what you're buying, what you're selling, and so on, and the pricing model. We tend to make contracts much more modular. So rather than trying to cover every eventuality, we tend to have these are the standard terms, 3-6 pages that are generally true, and then just a page or two for this kind of thing or that kind of topic, if it's a consulting versus a SaaS contract or whatever. So between modularity and just ruthlessly shortening things, you can cover the same ground, but it's just without focus be put on what are we buying, what are we selling, does it work, will it help, right? How do we make sure that this project doesn't go off track? How do we make sure that this service works, rather than just playing let's put so many weapons in our contract that they'll definitely perform this time. Which, by the way, there is a long track record of people trying to really weaponize contracts and make sure the suppliers, for example, absolutely doomed if it doesn't work, and it's still not working. And the classic example of this was the NHS IT projects, where there were incredibly robust contracts put in place with the suppliers, and it still failed because basically they would just sign anything to get the thing. The salesman would bugger off, right? Got his bonus or her bonus, and then people who were delivering were left to pick up the pieces. And despite having, the fear of death God put into them with this kind of terms, they still couldn't deliver because it hadn't been thought through.
Interesting. Okay. So you've had a successful law firm for, was it 13 years now?
Yeah, you say successful. Everything looks easy on the outside. Inside, it feels like, it's a wonderful journey, but it feels like it's tough. And, there's always stuff to improve.
But most people that started when you started are not there anymore. I mean, you're probably in the top 2% lasting that long. So what advice would you give to someone that is looking to start a law firm to try and, they can maybe share, the things that lie ahead that maybe you didn't see on day one, but you overcome? Just maybe talk a bit more about the journey to anyone that's, sitting in a law firm working for someone thinking, you know what, like you did, I don't like how this is going, I want to try and do it myself. Do you want to maybe give some guidance to someone in that position?
So we're really weird. And I struggle to say do it like us because we're really weird, and I don't know if it makes sense to most people, right? So
there might be weird people out there.
Okay, but lawyers weird, It's kind of, well, no, that maybe it's like that. You'd say as an outsider, but law firms are different, I think, and law firms are different because lawyers are different, and it's lawyers as a cohort have two standard deviations more likely to be high autonomy, unsociable. Interestingly, even rainmakers, the kind of people who are particularly successful at sales, they tend to be highly risk averse, and they tend to be very good at verbal reasoning and reasoning at things, but they're generally cats. Okay, so the fundamental question you're setting up a law firm is, do you fight the tendency of lawyers to be cats, or do you optimize for the cat-like nature of lawyers? So the typical model for a law firm is a partnership, right? Where all the partners can as long as they kind of play nice and fit in to some level and perform to some level, can do what they want, right? And then under the law firms, there are a bunch of terrified junior lawyers. Under the partners, there are a bunch of terrified junior lawyers. So law firms are traditionally the partnership model built for high autonomy of the partners, right? And so the whole thing is a power dynamic of you bring in, people, and they basically have power if they have a book of business. They're rainmakers, right? That's where power comes from. And there's a whole dynamic. So if you're setting up a law firm, the first question is, are you going to set up as a partnership, right? Which is what people normally do because it's easier to do it and so on. Like I said, we're weird. Or do you set up on the basis of, we're going to try to change how this is delivered. We're going to try to add more value. We're not just going to keep lawyering, are we going to have timesheets, or are we actually going to take process seriously and so on? And pretty much everyone comes to the conclusion, Christ, it's too hard, and I like my autonomy anyway, so I'll go to the partnership model. So that's why I said we're weird. I've been fighting since the very beginning, my own tendency and everyone's tendency to just disappear and become a total cat herding exercise, and instead say, no, we're going to have one way of working at the firm, which everyone's going to be followed, but everyone's going to be part of improving, right? We're going to actually take process and tech and so on seriously rather than just doing lawyering. And I think that is the hardest and most important decision you'll make, because whichever pathway you go, there's a huge path dependency going on, right? You can't take a partnership model and turn it into a radiant law. It's just not possible, because the power structure will prevent you from doing it in the future. So that kind of key seed decision is the one that I would focus on.
Okay, interesting. So on your journey from starting the firm to now, what are the kind of challenges you had, and how did you overcome them?
Well, I think the first challenge was we hadn't a bloody clue what we were doing. I mean, the level of naivety when we set this up, just a group of 5 of us, we hadn't a clue. I think the most important thing he did early on was I reached out. I finally met someone. He looked to me and said, he's Irish, the only feckin' thing you've done right is set up as a company. Right, we're going to that partnership point. Only feckin' thing you've done right. So that was tough, probably true. He was incredibly helpful in helping us kind of rethink how we were approaching it. And then I brought in a non-exec chair who, Greg Tufnell, used to run Mother Care and so on, brother of Phil Tufnell. And he was very sweet and gentle with us, but I think he was slightly shocked at how little we knew about it. They don't teach you this stuff in business school, law school rather, and they certainly don't learn it as a partner at a law firm. Like how little we knew about how to make this stuff work. So, and how P&Ls and balance sheets and I don't know, cash flow and all of the, the usual hygiene of business. But I think that's common when people start businesses. So we brought him in as non-exec chair, and he's been fabulous. So surrounding yourself with people who really know what they're doing and can help you think it through, I think is essential. You can't figure it out all for yourself.
Yeah.
So the journey was kind of, we got going as a group. I think we ended up pretty quickly acting like partners, even though we're a company now and it's different and all the rest of it, because we just fell back under pressure to what we knew. We kind of ended up growing quite big. There was a falling out at one point where some people left and so on. And it turns out, I felt this is an existential moment, but it turns out companies regularly have that event, right? I think that's, I'm pretty sure, Jamie, you've seen this before, right? This kind of happened at some point in the story, but
yeah.
It's not like encouraging people to have that moment, but it's pretty tough, but it does happen, right? Right. And Daniel Priestley is quite good at this stuff. From Den, describes it as how you can go to about 12 people and have a lifestyle business, and that's great. But then, what you want is a high performance business, more like 50 plus people with lots of tech and IP and knowing how to do it. And in between those two is what he calls the desert, where, people lose things and sometimes companies die and all the rest of it. And I think we had a lot of problems. I think we've kind of crossed it now, but we had a lot of problems in crossing the desert in terms of you've got to bring in people who know what they're doing, but they piss off the original founders. You've got to invest a huge amount in tech and process and all of this kind of IP creation and so on, which means your profits go down, right? Growth eats cash and working capital. So we went through all of that, and we got halfway through, got knocked back when it was like fallout, and then I think we've kind of got through now. So that was kind of the journey, and it's definitely got more fun. I think there were periods, Guys in the Desert, which are really hard, but now we kind of vaguely know what we're doing. When we look around every day and go, oh my God, so much to improve. It is much more fun running that kind of organization. So keep going, or decide not to go above 12 people, right? Like just say, a lifestyle business is great. I want to be able to take time off and do whatever. So, I guess knowingly choosing there is a good idea too.
Okay. So what advice you got to people in terms of recruitment about how to spot talent and how to,
I don't know.
etc.
I think this is so hard. We have a super structured process for interviewing, and I think we did something like Hire with Your Head or something. There's a good book on this with kind of methodology. But I still think it's pretty hit and miss. We do lots of psychometric testing, and I don't know whether that helps. I think we basically we hire people who interview well, which is, everything's about how to try to avoid that, but I think you still do it. We've got an amazing team, and I love the team. So we're definitely it's not a total disaster, right? We are hiring people, but we regularly, I think, get people who ultimately not that happy in this fairly unusual environment. So it's a minority, but it still happens. So I don't know. I think one thing that certainly occurred to me recently is that there's a big temptation to always go and hire the next big gun and, expensive people who will solve everything. And I think that overloads I think it's a high risk moves. I think you can get wonderful people, but often getting a wonderful person who will actually be able to deliver in your actual environment and actually work is quite a high risk strategy. So I do think that the more you can kind of solve problems by having kind of simple, repeatable processes and just taming a lot of the firm and making it run and not expecting it to be, work on pure heroics and instead just on building a repeatable system, the more you can decompress those hiring decisions. If that makes sense.
How did you know how to build that repeatable system?
Oh God, it's still a work in process. We have always been interested in lean, and I brought a professor of lean in South Korea in 2018, and that he helped. We're now like we turn contracts in half a day, I said, and that came from applying a lot of the lean principles. We're applying the Shingo model, which is this insanely high standard of operational excellence, kind of codified lean. Americans codified Japanese Toyota system. And I brought in people to help with that. So there was kind of a lot of kind of people going, oh my God, you got to have repeatable process and do these things and make it work like this. So that's, I mean, it's 13 years and I still feel we've barely scratched the surface. So a long way to go there. But there's a good book, E-Myth, which I think is helpful, but I read it and said, yeah, I got the point early on. And the point is, just everything you do in your organization, you figure out how to do it in a reasonable way and you hand it off. I don't think I'd taken it nearly as seriously, I realize now, as I should have done in terms of what that actually means, that discipline. But I guess everyone goes through that journey.
Sure. So in terms of, so once you've got the people in, how do you manage them to get the best out of them?
Again, work in progress. So we are I like to describe it as flattish, and we try to push decision making down to the team. So the team members are very junior often, and maybe kind of 5 years into their career often, who may be in charge of quite important things. And a lot of them just seize that and step up and run with it. But the hardest thing I think we find is to encourage people to feel a sense of real agency, that they can actually make things better and improve things. So we're constantly I'm constantly banging on about, like, you can actually fix things and just go and do it and make these things better and talk to other people who do it. And often I find team can get stuck and just keep going in their day-to-day work rather than improving things as part of their day-to-day work. So it's hard, but I do find that if we give people high levels of responsibility, they do step up. So, I mean, overall, it seems to be working as this, like I said, very weird, very flat kind of organization.
In terms of the future, how do you see the future going for Radiant Law and also the legal profession in general?
Well, Radiant, I want to grow, but most importantly, I want to grow on the dimension of just getting better at what we do and how we work as an organization. So I would love to one day challenge for the Shingo Prize, known as the Nobel Prize of Manufacturing, which no one in professional services has yet won. So that's kind of a personal ambition. And I think, it's such a lean and how we improve organizations, such a fascinating area. So for me, that's the great adventure ahead for Radiant. The legal industry, I used to have strongly held opinions about how everything was going to be changed, and I was utterly wrong, right? I mean, people have been talking about change in the legal industry forever, and now a lot of talk about how AI is going to replace all the lawyers. Good luck with that. I think it'll be business as usual for the foreseeable, I'm afraid. So I don't think there's going to be much change at all. There'll just be increasing talk of change, kind of performative stuff, not real stuff.
Be happy to give some more detail on that. Obviously, people that are getting their own contracts now through ChatGPT, and obviously there's flaws in that. Can you just give some examples of where that is completely flawed?
With ChatGPT, I mean, if you can't afford a lawyer, then it's better than nothing. But it is very unreliable, and it looks good. It looks like it's a great product, but it's kind of the output is frankly terrifying. I've spent a lot of time. I wrote a paper on if you find me on LinkedIn, I'll find a paper in November I wrote about it. It's also covered in the book, Sign Here. My recommendation, if you need a template and so on, is find a previous deal that looked okay and start from that, because it's probably coherent, and just keep improving that template and making it simpler and shorter, and talk to someone if you've got questions, but don't go and ask someone to write something for you, because it'll end up being huge. Just saying, I don't understand these 5 points. Can I change these? Are you okay? I think that's a much safer way of doing it. But the key for your contracts, if you're, especially kind of selling and so on, is putting what you're going to do up front and putting the focus on what the deal is. This is what we're selling. This is the things. This is how it's going to work. This is what we need you to do. This is how we'll charge you and when you charge you. And if you focus the contract on that and making sure that that really meets the customer's needs, the stuff at the back doesn't really matter. right? It doesn't really matter, right? So don't get hung up about that. Just focus on, are we seeing eye to eye going into this contract that both of us kind of know what's going to happen and what success looks like, and we believe it's got a real chance of working. And if you can keep going there, which is utterly dependent on your business, lawyers can't write that for you. It's like that's something you should be doing. I think your contracts will be much better and safer, right? Rather than throwing to GPT, where it is wild, the outcomes in terms of, I mean, just I can't figure out what the hell it's trying to do. It looks kind of vaguely good. It might look impressive, but the content itself is actually nonsense often.
Interesting. So you mentioned a lot in I think in the book and the articles about the importance of client relationships. So what's your advice to people in terms of, you know, maintaining and improving client relationships?
Honestly, you can't obsess enough about what the client needs, right? So everything starts with what do they actually need, what would actually help them, and the only way you find out is, rather than guessing, is talking to them on a regular basis and getting feedback cycles, and then actually doing something about the feedback. So I think, you know, one just needs to be obsessive about talking to clients and making sure that things are working and figuring out and being open to the idea that your service or product, whatever, isn't perfect, and constantly looking for how it could be improved. So I think that's everything, right? The more you focus on the other person, how you create value for them, the better, funnily enough, everything ends up working out for you. At least that's my experience. So yeah, that's my recommendation.
And where do you sign a client relationship? Some people say, obviously, you know, do what you can and talk, but in terms of, you know, the hospitality side, in terms of taking them out, you know, taking to events, etc., how important is doing that on top of just having a good relationship and contacting them a lot?
You know, you used to do that as a big law lawyer, right? That was pretty common. The firm had a box at Arsenal and box at the O2 and all of that. And that was kind of common and normal. These days, because a lot of the world's virtual at Radiant, we've never really gone down that route. I like to see people when I can, have calls with them. But I think that's quite, I think people like it, but to be honest, it's hard sometimes to figure out when that's not bribery.
Okay.
And right, I know, you know, kind of people like feel uncomfortable, but it's like, what exactly are you getting out of this other than, you know, I think the most important thing is actually meeting their day-to-day needs, right? And that is having conversations and talking.
Okay. Interesting. Have you got any examples of, and you don't need to obviously name it, just I'm thinking just helpful to listeners about where, you know, potentially if a relationship's not going right, how to spot it's not going right, even if someone's not being really clear about it, how to A, spot it, and then B, to intervene and then put it on the corrective path before, you know, the client is either disappears and is just not getting their needs met.
Yeah. Yeah, we've kind of figured out heuristics that are good warnings. Like, we know that if we don't respond to something in less than half a day, people ask for help in our, you know, when we're helping them with their contracts, that's a good indicator there'll be problems down the line. We know that if the contracts aren't coming in on a regular basis, but only spikes, then we know we're being basically put into a quadrant of, you know, this is just overflow and not really helping. So we do customer satisfaction scores with our business, and, you know, I see every result, and if we're not starting to get trends there, then you get worried. So and if we're not responding to them and picking up the phone and saying, listen, this wasn't great for you, how can we make it better, that's also a warning. So I think you can kind of put quite data-led heuristics in, especially in our world, which is lots of repeatable stuff, where you can spot that's going wrong. And my experience is, if something goes wrong and you really jump on it, then and help fix it and do it in a very positive, non-whiny, not self-justifying way, you'll often end up with a stronger relationship at the other end than if it hadn't gone wrong, which is, I'm not the first to observe that. But you know, that's kind of how we approach it.
Okay. Really good. Really good. So what's your advice to people that looking for a lawyer to make sure they find the right one, and, you know, when they approach potential people, the kind of questions they should be asking to make sure they get the right fit?
Yeah. This is very, very context specific, right? I mean, if you've got a big kind of M&A deal or litigation or something, then you may want to go to a law firm. But for smaller companies trying to just get pragmatic advice, I would actually be looking for that. You'll find out there kind of people who are like fractional GCs or general counsel or kind of lawyers who often one man, one woman bands that have got a lot of experience, but now work with lots of small companies. And I think finding people like that is incredibly valuable because you get just judgment calls. You get people who are going to be quick and who go, no, the point's this. This is worry about this. The more you get sucked into kind of bigger law firms, middle tier law firms, the more incredibly expensive it gets, and the pressure on the lawyers to like charge as many hours as possible and blah 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 is going to make it, I think, often feel like a very poor experience. And then you've got a question of at what point in your growth journey do you eventually hire a lawyer? And I think what I would do is have a long-term relationship with someone you trust who can help you with your contracts on tricky points and is actually making you sustainable and so on, help you with like data protection, employment issues, yada, yada, you know, and at least give you another person if they don't do it. And then, you know, take your time about hiring your own in-house lawyer. But then, you know, at some point it becomes cost effective to bring them in-house. It's the basic equation is that an in-house lawyer is about the third the cost of an external lawyer. So if you've got the work of a lawyer happening every year, you may be better off bringing it in. Is kind of the point when you.
Okay. Alex, is there anything we've not covered today that you think would be helpful for business owners that are listening to this podcast?
I think just that nagging feeling you have of this contracting process has seemed ridiculous and painful, and I'm not entirely sure, but I'm a bit afraid because, you know, I don't want to go to jail, I don't know, whatever. Just don't lose that feeling and trust yourself. You're right. These contracting is being made way too complicated, way too hard. And if we could just focus on creating a great relationship and being really clear about what each side's doing, the legal stuff is a lot less important. And so trust yourself on that gut instinct.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Alex. It's been really refreshing to hear a very different approach to law, contracts, and love your honesty showing about the journey and you know, the hiring and the managing of people, and also giving people at lower levels more of a chance to shine. It's really refreshing. So thanks very much for joining, Alex. I'm sure there's lots of really good things for the listeners to take upon and take action on. If people want to contact you because they're interested in contracts that aren't 60 pages long or anything else, how would they do that?
It's Alex Hamilton on LinkedIn, and the book's called Sign Here, and that's on Amazon. But I'd like to send you a copy if you get in touch. Yeah, happy to talk.
Thank you, Alex. It's been a pleasure.
Brilliant, Jeremy. Thank you.